Hello, and welcome to the Class Fantasy discussion for Ashes of Creation. I'm Shivafang. Today I want to be talking about the class fantasy of the Weapon Master. So, the class fantasy of the Weapon Master is that of a pure fighter who's focused on mastering all the different weapon types and becoming a true master of combat. The fantasy for this class is all about being a frontline fighter who deals massive damage to their enemies and using their skills of their weapons alone. The Weapon Master, it's not interested in magic, healing, or other support roles, and instead focuses solely on being a DPS powerhouse. What I think draws players to the Weapon Master is the idea of being a true master of combat, and the desire to deal a lot of damage using only your weapon skills. I think it will attract players who want fast-paced combat, who they just want to get in and deal a bunch of burst damage, and that's about it. So this fighter secondary class, I think, will allow player to specialize in weapon mastery. The fighter augments will probably be centered around things to do with weapons, things to do with close range. While other secondary classes would offer more diverse gameplay options, the Weapon Master will be the choice for players who want to focus on being the ultimate combat machine. The fantasy here is being the ultimate combat machine, dealing massive amounts of damage and looking cool doing it. We can expect this class to have a high skill cap while focusing on the specific focus of what it means to be a fighter rather than a broader variety of skill. The Weapon Master won't gain the benefits of multi-classing in their classes, but choosing fighter as both the primary and secondary class would allow for specialization into pure DPS with their weapons. Perhaps we'll see characters' combat skills enhanced further with, bleeding or critical hits. So for players like me who like build diversity, when I look at quote-unquote pure classes, I immediately think, boring. Why would I ever want to do that? I'm going to upload a video that I did of the ranking of the classes. I found that footage. I recorded it way back when I first found out about Ashes in last August. And you can hear in it that I immediately dissed the pure classes. I was like, boring. There's no way I want to do that. Boring. I'm the type of player that likes to build diversity of differences between the classes. And I wanted to do this video near the beginning of my series for this very reason. If I'm talking about the class fantasy of all 64 classes, then we have to talk about the pure classes too. Now, I'm the type of player who wants to find ways to subvert the base expectations of these quote-unquote boring classes. And for that, we look to Pathfinder. So my favorite pure fighter build in Pathfinder is the Archer Fighter. If I'm going to go pure fighter with no cross-classing, that's what I go to. Now, in the D20 based games, fighters are defined by their combat feats. So other classes get unique class features that are unique to them. Actually, that's not true, because some of the fighters' class features required you to be a fighter of a certain level. So I guess they were kind of unique, but they were unique to the fighter. They were just options that you could choose or you could choose a different combat feat. While a ranger might get, they do. So rangers do get both. You can either choose to be bow or two weapon combat in Pathfinder and Pathfinder Battle games, where you would get some combat feats, you would gain the combat feats as bonus feats, but the fighter got more of them. However, the fighter didn't get things like the nature magic. They didn't get the animal companion. They didn't get some of the other mobility and terrain-based things that the ranger gets. Whereas the archer fighter, you got your weapon focus. You got your weapon specialization. Weapon specialization was so good that almost every class that did any kind of damage with weapons, and even some spellcasters, took 4 levels of fighter for weapon specialization. Weapon specialization gives you +2 to your damage rolls. So if you're dealing a D8 for damage, D8 plus strength damage, an extra 2 points of damage is huge. Okay, so that's the idea there. That's the idea there. The novice looking at D&D and saying, "Hey, I want to play an archer. Oh, I guess I'm a ranger," isn't looking at the potential of the fighter, because people look at the fighter and go, "No, that's a melee build." People look at the fighter and go, "No, that's a melee class," except that it isn't. Even in AD&D, I always had a fighter rogue, or actually in the Icewind Dale video game, I almost always had a fighter mage rogue who stood in the back and used the bow when they weren't casting spells. Now, I like this type of character so much that I played this in DDO. Although in DDO, there was one trait that was unique to Rangers that kind of forced me into taking one level of Ranger for the character build to be effective. And also Guild Wars 2. I loved playing the Longbow Warrior in Guild Wars 2. It was easily one of my most played characters after the Mesmer. It was also a thing in Guild Wars 1. The first time I saw a bow using Warrior in Guild Wars 1, I was like, why would anyone do that? Because all the bow skills use energy. And the Ranger got away with it because the Ranger's expertise skill, their weapon skills the energy costs are reduced. But the fighters have the lowest energy, and all the bow skills use energy. And it seemed like a thing where the warrior would run out of energy. However, what I noticed was that the warrior's primary strength attribute, which allows them to bypass armor, worked with the bow. So they were basically punching through armor at a distance. It actually wound up being very, very good. I actually did wind up seeing it in PvP quite often. Now, one of the things about Ashes of Creation, when they're talking about the different archetypes, they do talk about the fighter in terms of being non-DPS. However, in one of the live streams, I want to say it was at the end of the January live stream. It might have been at the end of the November live stream, but during the question and answer period, Stephen Sharif was talking about the fighter, and at one point he talks about them being the master of all weapons, and he said that includes bows. So I am almost certainly that there will be a bow build that will exist for the Weapon Master, and I believe that it will exist in the Weapon Master design space, and also in the Hunter design space, the Hunter being Fighter Ranger. Anyway, let me know in the comments below what your vision of this class is for the Weapon Master. I'm curious to find out what other people think. Once again, I turned to ChatGPT to flesh out some of the existing ideas I already had for the Augment systems. I settled on 5 options, although I think some of these are going to be combined, or not all of these are going to be used. So the 5 options I came up with are Close Combat, Dominance, Mastery, Fury, and Endurance. So let's talk about Close Combat first. I have a very, very strong suspicion that every player, nearly every player at the very least, who wants fighters as secondary, wants to change their build to be melee combat. So this augment allows them to do that. It's one of the things specifically that this augment can do. We know for a fact, based on what's already been said, is that changing the range of skills, and specifically turning range skills into melee skills, is a thing that augments are going to be designed to be doing. And this allows you for, your battle mages who are on the front lines. This allows for cleric fighters who are kind of your typical D&D cleric. This allows for, your rogues who want to be more duelist types. This allows for your rangers who want to be more melee. I'll talk about that next video, actually. Now, this skill may not be useful for the Weapon Master because we presume that a large portion of the builds for the fighter are going to be melee focused. Although I expect, like I said earlier, I expect there to be some ranged options for bow using warriors, but we expect that the fighter will mostly be close combat already. So if the skill is melee, it might give them additional benefits, perhaps increased damage or status effects. And this kind of brings me into the next augment, and that is Dominance. I actually wrote my ideas for what I wanted to say on this like a week ago. took me a week to get around to recording it. So I actually think Dominance is probably the one that's gonna go away, because there's only gonna be 4 augments. Dominance is about augmenting the fighter's ability to do crowd control and weaken the defense of their enemies. So the idea behind it was that fighters will want some way to control the battlefield and keep enemies from running away from them as well. And this is why I think it might be rolled into close combat. So skills that are already melee might gain the ability to, augment their strength or augment their ability to keep players at range at close combat. If you have a melee attack that could be like a grab, or that will slow the target and keep enemies from moving away from you and keeping them in close combat, would also be part of that augment as well. The dominance augment could also be useful in like team-based combat scenarios, allowing the fighter to create openings for allies, deal additional damage, or to take advantage of weak enemies. Now the third one, this one I think is going to be very, very critical to fighter secondary, especially when you talk about being a weapon master. What does it mean to be a weapon master? And for that, we need to talk about the weapon use combat system and how the weapons work and how weapon skill trees work. So in Ashes of Creation, it's going to have a feature called the weapon use combat system. So the weapon use combat system is a sequence of combat animations based on the weapon type. So this is triggered by performing your basic weapon attacks. There's no real auto attack. You have to right-click to swing your weapon. And this creates a series of combos. These combos have various stages, and each stage is their available procs that can be applied based on the character's weapon skill tree. These are repeatable basic attacks the player can attack continuously with that are dependent on the power of the weapon, the type of the weapon, and the additional proc attacks that you spec can do. Now, using a skill other than a basic attack generally resets this combo. So you see in some of the footage of the melee attacks where they're doing like 3 swings, and each swing is different. Like one's a swing downwards to the left, one is a swing upwards, and then maybe one is like a straight downward attack. For example, if you use a different skill, it resets the combo. So when you attack your first swing, you start at the first stage. So this is where the weapon mastery augment can come in. The weapon mastery augment could allow skills to continue the combo rather than resetting it. Or perhaps it could apply some aspects to the proc. So when you spec into your procs, we know, for example, that daggers will have, I forget, it's either poison or bleed. Daggers will allow you to create some kind of a dot of some kind. It's either poison or bleed, I forget. I think they talked about the log swords being able to stagger. I think it was another example that they gave. So perhaps maybe then if you attack twice with your weapon and then a skill augmented with the mastery augment, could then apply that same status effect. So this will have implications for things like rogue fighter who want to be very combo chain focused, to allow them to use their skills without breaking their combo, maybe even use their skills instead of the weapon use combo. And in this way, fighter secondaries can master their weapons. Now the fourth augment that seems typical of fighters in most games, however, it kind of takes away from the Trinity system, and this is one of the things that Guild Wars 2 was hurt by, and that is endurance. Because characters who take fighters secondary intend to be close to the front lines, there often needs to be some sort of mitigation inherent to the secondary. Because if you think about a mage is not going to have tools to deal with being on the front lines inherent in their build. Same thing with rogue. Rogue might not have the types of things that they would normally use to mitigate damage on the front lines. So if classes are speccing into fighter to gain some of that close combat ability, they also need some ability to offset the damage they're taking. Now, this feels a little bit wrong because of the focus on the Trinity, the triad gameplay. So self-heal should really be the domain of the cleric, and damage mitigation should be the role of the tank. Fighter secondaries having the ability to have some kind of endurance does kind of take away from those archetypes as options as well. But being in melee itself is a disadvantage versus attacking from range. So therefore, range-focused classes that don't innately have abilities to deal with this need some kind of way to offset. Now, if endurance isn't a thing, then the fighter secondary becomes very glass cannon on the front lines. Therefore, instead of being someone who sustains the damage on the front lines, let's leverage this position to augment our base damage as a DPS class. So, the Fury Augment, or something like it, could give the secondary fighter additional damage when on low health, perhaps as a temporary bonus after taking damage. Perhaps there even could be a range mechanic, although it's hard to say if they're going to implement mechanics on the secondaries. We know that class mechanics are a thing. We've seen class mechanics for both the cleric and the tank. They didn't talk about class mechanics when they showcased the fighter the first time, so we don't know if the fighter is even gonna have a mechanic. If they did, it would probably be some kind of fury. We also don't know if the mechanics are going to be available to secondary. Now that said, I could see fury being something that would work well for like wild mages or barbarians. Ranger fighter can make a very archetypal barbarian, medium armor. As a fighter secondary, they could have like a two-handed weapon and some fury mechanics. That would be very, very interesting. I'll talk about that idea more in the next video, which is going to be about the Strider. Even if we don't use rage as a mechanic, the concept of being glass cannon and punishing enemies who damage you is definitely something that's along the lines of the fighter secondary. It seems to fit the flavor of the class fantasies of a lot of the classes who are fighter secondary. The Fury is a great augment for players who want to deal damage and be true glass cannons on the front line. The Augment provides additional damage where the player is on low health or after taking damage, making them more effective in combat as they take risks to deal more damage. And this Augment can be useful for players who want to play a barbarian or wild mage type character, as it adds to the class fantasy of being fierce and powerful in combat. That's all I've got for today. Thank you very much for hearing me ramble out my thoughts on the fighter. I look forward to hearing your thoughts on what you think the Weapon Master will look like, what kinds of augments you think will exist for this archetype combination. If you have a particular class you want me to cover sooner rather than later, please let me know down in the comments below, bearing in mind that we know nothing about the Rogue, Bard, or Summoner archetypes. I'll be uploading the video where I ranked all of the classes by order of how interested I am in playing them, so feel free to check that out next. Join me next time when I blather on about the Strider, which is the Ranger fighter.